Who are the ancient Rus? Who are the ancient Rus? To be or not to be? Is that the question? No, that is not the question. The question is, are the origins of the Rus Slavic or Norse? Are they Norse or are they Slavic? Are they from Sweden or Norway? Are they from the Hanseatic League? Or are they from the Slavs from wherever the hell the Slavs come from? What is the etymology of Rus? Get to the etymology of the word and maybe we'll figure out where these damn Russians come from. The Finnish word for Sweden, Ruotsi. Ruotsi, the Rus, Ruotsi. So whenever the Finnish were talking about the Swedes, whenever Finland was talking about Sweden, they were sitting there saying, them damn Rootsis, fucking Ruski motherfuckers, Rootsis or Ruskis? I said Rootsis, not Ruski. Ruskis, okay, the Ruskis, fuck them Ruski. So basically, back in Finland, 1,000 years ago, they're saying fuck them Rootsis. And now we're saying fuck them Ruskis. Same shit, the same, Estonian word for Sweden is, guess what? Ruotsi. So, where do all these Russians come from? Sweden. They're a bunch of fucking Swedish Vikings. The Kievan Rus is a bunch of Swedish Vikings. The Swedish Vikings came and conquered the Slavs, and then after, I guess, 400 years, melded together. The conquering Rus and the conquered Slavs eventually. So, the Rus. Let's get back to it, okay? So, the story is you got Rurik. Rurik is the father. The Rurik dynasty is going to go on and on forever and ever. I think Ivan the Terrible back in the 1400s. So the Rurik dynasty, even though the Kievan Rus only lasted for 400 years, the Rurik dynasty, it lasts longer. Then there's the times of the Troubles, and then there's the Romanovs, and then there's the Bolsheviks, and then that's, brings us up to date. But if you just learn those two dynasties, the Romanov dynasty, the house of the Romanovs, and the house of the Ruriks, you got a big-ass chunk of Russian history right there. So the father of, I would say, the ancient Russians would be Rurik. Rurik. R-U-R-I-C. So is that where, Russian, the Rus, followers of Rurik? Hey, who are you following? Oh, the Ru? Mr. Ru? Yeah, Mr. Rurik, okay? We'll just call him Rurik. Does that make it easier? We're the Rus and he's Rurik. The father is Rurik. Igor is the son. Oleg is the brother-in-law. Rurik dies, and then he gives his son to Oleg. He's only 3 years old. Igor is 3 years old. Oleg is now king. He's the brother-in-law that Rurik had chosen to succeed him. Oleg then dies, and then Igor rules. Then Igor is ripped up into two by the Drevlians, by the native Ukrainians. The Drevlians did not want the goddamn Spanish Vikings or the Swedish Vikings in their, they didn't take kindly to being taxed 2 times in a single month. The Drevlians hated being taxed 2 times in a single, so they ripped Igor in half. They tied both of his feet to 2 birch trees, and then tied him up they bent the birch trees over, tied them up, then they cut the birch trees, and then fucking flung them, ripped them up into, and then Olga. It's up to Olga to come and redeem not only her husband, but the Russo-Swedish Vikings of the Novgorod nation. So Olga has to come and redeem Igor after being ripped into 2. Ripped into 2. Like, fuck. It's one thing just to, cut someone's head off or something, but to tie their legs to 2 birch trees, to bend the birch trees over, to tie their legs to them, and then to cut the birch trees, it's like some kind of catapult, some sort of ancient sort of catapult fucking. The Finnish word for Sweden, Ruotsi. Estonian word for Sweden, Ruotsi. Why do you think that is? The Ruotsi, fucking Ruski, Ruotsi motherfuckers. So the origins of the Rus, I think, are Norse to begin with, the Norse. But after 400 years, the people that the Swedish Vikings had oppressed, the Kievan Rus, they're all fucking Rusin by then, right? They're all a bunch of Ruses in. What? You bunch of Slavs? You motherfuckers didn't overthrow the Rus? Why didn't you overthrow the damn Rus, you fucking Slav? Because you're Slavs? Is that why? You don't know how to overthrow the Rus because you're a bunch of Slavs? Who are you? We're the slaves. Okay, you gotta stop that shit. You're not the slaves. You're the gods, okay? You're the fucking gods. You're the original. When God said, I'm going to put man here in Ukraine, they said, I'm going to put Slavs. They didn't say, I'm going to put Ruses. The Ruses came and stole your shit. Or maybe Ru came from the Germanic tribe Rugi, the Rus, the Ruti, the Rutikli, the Rugi. So you got a Germanic tribe called the Rugi. So you got the Rugi, spitting loogies, and the Rootsis, and the cutesy, the cutesy Rootsis with the fine-ass booties. Cutesy Rootsis. So others present the Proto-Finnic name for Sweden. Ruotsi is a root Norse word for men who row, a certain Rus people from eastern coastal Sweden, specifically from the region of Roslagen, Rus law. Roslagen is Rus law. So, yeah, the Ruotsi, we're talking about the Roslagen. What's Roslagen? The law of the Rus people. Where's that at? Sweden? Oh, okay, so the Russians are a bunch of Swedish Vikings? Exactly. The ancient Russians, the Kievan Rus, Oleg, and fucking Olga, and Rurik, and Igor. Yeah, they're a bunch of Spanish or Swedish Vikings. They are not native Ukrainians. They are not native. I don't even know if you can call them Russians. Frankly, the Slovenes are the native Russians. The Slovenes, the Novgorod Slavs, are the Slovenes. So those would be the native Russians, right? The equivalent for the Native American for Russia. Finnish, so Ruotsi is Finnish, the origin from Old Swedish, Robs related to rowing, related to Old Norse, the land of rowing. Older name, Roslagen, where the Finns and Swedes first met. So, what is going on here? The Proto-Slavic word Rus and the older word Ruds means fair, blonde, fair-haired. I'm not sure what that's about, but my conclusion is that it's both. You had both. You had the Rus, came from Sweden. They're the Swedish Vikings. So, hey, there's the Rus. We're the Rus. We're the Rus, and the Rus are doing this, and they're in Novgorod. Then they're in the Ladoga. And so the fatherland of the Rus is Murom. If you want to say the Russians aren't the Swedish Vikings, but it's where the Swedish Vikings first took hold, then the father of the Swedish Vikings would be Murom. It would be Murom, and it would be Novgorod, and it would be Ladoga. And so those are the three father cities, and then they're going to take over Kiev 20 years later. And so they were the Rus. They've been the Rus their entire lives. But then the Kievan Rus happened for 400 years. So that which the Rus oppressed and the Slavs married and intermarried, and they became, one. So both. I think that Rurik, the king of the Rurus, you got both of those going together. So you have Rurik. His name is important. Followers of Rurik are the Rus, the Ruskis. You're following Rurik, right? The Ruskis and the Rurik and the Ruskis. And then he was, came from the Rootsis. So the Swedish Vikings came to Novgorod, set up shop. For 20 years, they were up there in the north, and then they set up shop in the south with the Kievan Rus. And then for 400 years, the Kievan Rus had their golden years. They set up a state. That's the only thing the Kievan Rus really did was they established a state, and they built some, churches and palaces and shit for themselves and some fortresses. No schools, no hospitals, nothing for anybody else. Just a military for themselves and a bunch of shit for... So anyways, and then they're going to get conquered by the Mongolians, and the Byzantines are right there next door. So you want two better empires? There's the Mongolians, and then there's the Byzantines, okay? Jesus Christ. If I'm fucking Ukrainian, I'm like, man, I'm more Byzantine than I am motherfucking Swedish Viking, The Byzantines lasted for 1,000 years. The Kievan Rus lasted for 400 years. Anyways, the point is, you have Rurik, who comes from the Ruotsi people, right? They're the Rootsis, the Ruslagen people, the Rootsis. And this is from Finland and from Estonia, so they would know best, right? So Finland and Estonia are sitting there calling the Swedish Vikings a bunch of Roosties, the Ruskis. These Ruskis go to Novgorod and Ladoga and Murom, and they set up shop there. That's where the father of the Russian, the Ruses are, but then the Kievan Rus are gonna, that's an empire that included Novgorod and included the north. But then when Moscow forms, and Peter the fucking Great and Catherine the Great, these motherfuckers are just pretending to be Slavic so that way they can, try to take over the Ukrainian lands. Catherine the Great was born in Poland, so Catherine the Great isn't even Russian. She was born in Poland. And then Peter the Great, his father was born in Moscow, so he's a Muscovite. Peter the Great is fucking Muscovite, and then his mother's a Tartar. So, you just have all these goddamn foreigners that keep coming into Ukraine saying that we're just like you. We're the Slavs. Some of these damn Ruskis would put Slav at the end of their name. There's Yaroslav the Wise. Well, I mean, that is pretty wise, right? He said he's a Slav. Hey, guys, I'm one of you. I'm a Slav. I'm just like you guys. I'm a Slav. But then, fast forward 1,000 years and you got the Slavs that are sitting there saying that they're the Ruses. So there does seem to be a competition. Who's the real Ruses? Well, I'm the real Rus. You the real Rus? Rus could suck my fucking nuts, fucking chewing my damn chode for all I give a fuck. But coming from an outside perspective, what happened? You got the king of the Rurus that fucking ruled shit for 400 years. The Slavs and the Ruskis melded to one. And then by the end of it, by the time that the Mongolians came through, they kind of were the Russians. They kind of were the fucking Slavs. They did kind of, sort of swap cultures and then recreate something new. So it's kind of a Ruski Slavic culture, a Slavic Ruski culture, right? And so where does Rus come from? It comes from the Swedish Vikings, and it comes from the Kievan Rus, and it comes from the leader of the Rurik dynasty, which is Rurik. So I think they call it the Rurikans or something, the Rurikans. I don't know. I'm just going to read, there's a couple articles here I'm just going to read to you. Maybe it's boring, maybe it's not, but that's my conclusion. The Ruotsis are what the Finnish and the Estonian, the root word for Sweden is Ruotsis. So they're the Ruotsis. I think there's a city called Ruotsi in Germany too. So yeah, Catherine the Great's a fucking Polish German right there on the border of Poland, Germany. So these Polish Germans are coming around to the Slavs, and these Swedish Vikings are coming to the Slavs, and they keep saying, hey, we're one of you guys, and they keep trying to oppress them and take over. What Ukraine needs is a king of the Slavs. They need one of their own. You have, to just review, the ancient Ukrainians, you have the Cimmerians, Scythians, Scoloti, and the Gravettians. But in the Slavs, when it comes to the ancient Ukrainians, the Ukrainians, not the ancient, but just the ancient Ukrainians, in the times of the Kievan Rus, these are the Ukrainians that the Swedish Vikings had oppressed. The Chuds, the Drevlians, the Vyatichis, the Pollyannas, the Pochans, the Croatians, and the Kriviches. So if you want to know who the native Ukrainians are, then you would find out who the Chuds and the Drevlians and the Vyatichis, the Pollyannas, the Pochans, the Croatians, and the Kriviches are. The Drevlians, they took Igor and ripped him in half because he taxed him 2 times in 1 month. So the Drevlians, the, native Ukrainians, did not like the Spanish Vikings, Oleg and Igor and Rurik and, Olga's revenge. She's going to eventually, get some revenge, but they didn't like that shit. The Drevlians, the native Ukrainians, they did not like the Swedish Vikings, taking over and taxing them and oppressing them and